The new Middle East plan. Much of the world has been divided by the superpowers, and later by the Zionist bankers. We see that the history of the world has always been told by the victors, that is, those in power, and yet equality is the essence that we all yearn for, but equality has only ever been a yearning, never achieved. Most regions and continents were divided by the New World Order powers in order to manage them better. This happened in South America and Africa and Asia and also other regions. The primary difference is that the Middle East never forgot its history, and this did not reconcile with the victors, who wanted to recreate historical facts. And so the Middle East can never be divided properly, as it is always remaining uncontrollable for those that seek such powers. Hence the never-ending wars and the never-ending plans to divide it into even smaller parts. And so we begin. The Ottoman Empire had its golden age, and at times also had splendor. And then it had its times of disasters, particularly at the end, with two successive leaders who were against regionalism and were isolationists. The two last leaders of the Ottoman Empire decided to destroy all printing presses in Arabia and oppressed many different people of different ethnic groups. The reason for this is that they wanted to centralize the power of the empire into only their own regions, hence removing the old concept of the Ottoman Empire that was more of teamwork and that was a great success. Thus, from cooperation it went into dictatorship, implemented by the two last leaders of the Ottoman Empire. This led to the eventual collapse of the empire as different groups no longer sought its existence. When the Ottoman Empire was attacked, instead of protecting it, the different regions decided to let it collapse, and while others even joined the enemy in attacking it. This was how the Ottoman Empire collapsed. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, it was France and the UK and the USA that were remapping the Middle East, even though at that time oil discoveries were not yet known to the great extent that we know today. Arabs fought many battles against colonial powers, and finally a map was agreed for the Arab regions, and most of the nations were at that time in agreement. Many of the large nations, such as Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Libya, were considered small at the time, considering the size of the Ottoman Empire. So for the colonial powers, they thought that it was a success in turning the Middle East into smaller nations and destroying its influence compared to its larger past. But then came the oil boom, and the maps no longer made sense from a colonial control point of view. The large nations now had much of the world's oil reserves. They had also refused to be slave nations for the most part. Iraq and Libya, for example. The Middle East needed to be remapped in order to remove its power once more. Large nations had to become smaller tribal groups that battle each other endlessly in order to prevent any benefits from their wealth and oil reserves. The powers decided to divide the following nations into three parts: Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Tunisia, Algeria, and Egypt. And the following nations should be divided into many parts: the United Arab Emirates, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan. All nations of the Middle East were aware that they were going to be divided. Some nations were told, you can prevent your own divisions by obeying. Others were benefiting from destruction, such nations as the UAE and Qatar and Kuwait, by gaining new business from destroyed neighboring nations. An example of this is Iraq and Libya and Somalia. News channels such as Al Jazeera, which is Qatar State TV, and Al Arabiya, Saudi State TV, were instrumental in the goal to re-divide the Middle East into manageable nations. Iran has gained too much influence and power to be divided, and at this moment Syria itself has also shown itself capable to overcome the division plans. Iran may instead be used by the same New World Order powers as an instrument to divide the others. The plan to create a smaller and more easily controlled Middle East is part of a global plan to control all nations in the world and bring global governance. A world government that is planned by the year 2030.